This painting fell out of a window. It hit the floor hard enough to puncture a hole straight through it. I thought it was completely ruined, but fixing the damage changed everything. The whole color scheme, the direction of the painting, all of it came from that fall. Sometimes you don't fix the damage fixes the painting. This episode starts with a layer guessing contest. This painting has many, many layers. To enter, your comment must include two things: the exact number of layers and the magic word, which appears once at some point later in this video. No magic word, no official entry. Guessing will not count. The person who gets it right will choose one prize: a $500 art supply gift card, $1,000 worth of my artwork, or $250 cash. The only way to win is to watch all the way through. Please note this is void where prohibited, only one guess per person, and all the official boring rules will be posted in the description. Good luck with your counting. I will be helping you with 3 clues on screen along the way. I don't love the blank canvas. I don't hate it either. I'm mostly indifferent to it. It's new, technically perfect, untouched, and at some point, I have to ruin that perfection to turn it into something that's actually mine. At this stage, the work isn't really speaking yet. No lines of communication, so to speak. What is there are cues, subtle ones, about when it makes sense to take the reins and how firmly. That part's on me. So instead of acting, I'm mostly watching, scanning the surface, studying how early interactions sit, how the materials behave when there's almost no history layered into them yet. There's a calm here, but it's neutral. The calm of something that hasn't expended any energy yet, just newness waiting to be interrupted. That's where the decision making really starts, not with a gesture, but with restraint. Knowing when to step in, how much to assert, and how much to leave unresolved so it has room to become something else. This piece is going to ask more than most. I didn't know that when I started. It'll need more adjustments, intervention, more moments where I'll have to change course without pretending that was the plan all along. So I'm taking this part seriously before anything commits too hard in one direction. Let's see where it goes. A lot of people tell me that they watch these videos when they're tired. Not just physically tired, but mentally worn down. The kind of tired that comes from too much noise, too many headlines, too many opinions pulling you in opposite directions all day. too much time on social media, getting stirred into outrage, then slowly nudged into buying something you didn't know existed till 10 minutes ago, but now desperately need to survive. You wake up already behind, already bracing yourself, already tense, and wondering if it's too early to go back to bed. I feel that so much. For me, painting is one of the few places where things can actually slow down, where time stretches instead of compresses, where I can focus on one small action at a time, one layer, one decision, one quiet moment of attention. Not because it fixes the world, it very much doesn't, but because it creates a pocket of calm inside of it, a place where the volume drops and nothing is urgently asking for a response. I hear from people who watch these long form, ambient art videos late at night, or after the kids are finally asleep, or during that strange in between moment when you know you should be resting, but you're not quite sure how to do that anymore. Some people watch with the sound low, some barely look at the screen, some just let the colors move while their thoughts slowly untangle. All of that is exactly how this work is meant to be used. This isn't about keeping up. It's not about productivity. It's not about learning everything that's happening on the canvas in real time. It's about letting yourself breathe for a bit, letting your nervous system catch up with your body. That's what this painting process does for me, and that's why I keep the pace slow, the visuals calm, and the experience unhurried. If this channel gives you even a few minutes of relief, if it helps your shoulders drop, your jaw unclench, or your thoughts stop racing long enough to notice the vibrance of color, that's a win. Maybe you'll pick up something along the way about fine art, materials, or how abstract paintings come together over time. Or maybe you're just spending a little while inside a quieter world that feels more manageable than the one outside your window or inside your head. You don't have to solve anything here. You don't have to react to anything. You can just be present. One thing I've always done in my studio is use found materials. Sometimes that means things I didn't plan on using at all. Sometimes it means leftovers from the process itself. Things that would normally get tossed without a second thought. Case in point, this tray. These little hardened acrylic circles come straight from the tips of my fluid acrylic bottles. Over time, they just build up, drop by drop, color by color. And instead of throwing them out, I collect them. I like to think of it a bit like how Native Americans used to use every part of the buffalo. Nothing wasted, everything considered. Except, in this version, it's a slightly broke, mildly self-conscious artist using every part of his studio for the betterment of his wallet and the environment. It's not glamorous, but it is efficient. And honestly, it keeps the process interesting. These small pieces already carry history. They've been through the painting process once before, just in a different role. They're layered, accidental, and impossible to replicate exactly, which is more or less the style of my work at large. I actually use these as part of my signature on each finished canvas. One small mark embedded into the surface. It's quiet, but it is consistent, a physical trace of the process making its way into the final piece. That detail matters to me. Abstract art can sometimes feel removed from the hand that made it. This is a way of folding the studio back into the work, material memory sitting right there on the surface. It also fits how I like to think about the painting in general. Calm, slow, intentional, but resourceful. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. If you're paying attention, you'll actually see one of these get added to this painting at some point. It happens quietly, no big announcement. So consider that a small side quest. See if you can spot when it shows up. For me, using found materials like this keeps the work grounded. It keeps the process honest. And it turns what could have been waste into something personal and permanent. Calm painting, thoughtful materials, and a studio that tries, at least a little, to use everything it creates. That feels like a good system to work inside. I'm curious, what kind of art do you usually connect with? Some people love realism. That's a little cliche, but to each their own. If it works, it works. Some people are drawn to illustration, comics, or cartoons. Others like abstraction, where things don't really have to explain themselves or resolve into anything familiar. I've done just about all of it. I started out making comic books and cartoons. I designed tattoos. I spent years painting replicas of old masters for people who were very well off, being extremely accurate, very polite, and mostly invisible. I was by and large a commissions artist only. Somewhere in there, I managed to lose myself. Not in a dramatic way, more like misplacing your car keys and then realizing it's been years. This abstract work, is what showed up afterward. This is where I landed. I'm still figuring it out. Life is fragile in ways you don't really understand until it's gone. When I first moved back to New York, I wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. The one person who was there for me was David Brockett. He was supposed to show me the ropes at a new job, but instead, he became a real friend. In a pretty toxic workplace, he was the one constant, professional, kind, and genuinely decent. Dave fought ALS for almost 3 years. I watched him go from being upwardly mobile to unable to pull himself up in bed. Still, he put up a hell of a fight. I wish I would have been there for him more. I miss you, Dave. I wish you could have met my sons. They would have thought the world of you. This is not how I want it to look. Guess it's time for a do-over. If you're struggling right now, I want to say something simple. Doing something matters. It doesn't have to be impressive or productive or shared with anyone. It just has to exist. Maybe that something is making your own art. Great. Follow that. But maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just carving out a quiet corner, a desk, a chair by the window, a small space where nothing is expected of you for a few minutes. That still counts. I think we underestimate how much noise we live with and how damaging it is. A calm space, even a very small one, can be a way back to yourself. Not a solution, not a cure, just a foothold. So if all you can do right now is make things a little quieter, that's enough. Especially since carrying a flask and day drinking is generally frowned upon. You don't have to fix everything. You just have to take one small step toward calm. I almost never open new paint. It's not a rule, it's just how I work. I'm efficient to a fault. I'll mix, reuse, and stretch what I have until there's absolutely nothing left before opening something new. This is green gold, a high flow fluid acrylic from Golden Paints. It's one of those colors that does a lot with very little effort, transparent, reactive, and surprisingly assertive when it needs to be. I don't even particularly like green. It's one of those colors that I tend to ignore. I'll let it do its thing here, just briefly, with a splash of blue to keep it honest. After this on-canvas blend, I'll sit back and watch things for a minute, figure out what to do next. For a long time, I avoided color altogether. My work lived almost entirely in black and white. Pencil, pen and ink, very controlled, very deliberate. Black and white is honest in a brutal way. There's nowhere to hide. If something's wrong, it shows up immediately. A weak decision stays weak. A mistake doesn't blend in. And I liked that clarity. It felt direct, unforgiving, but fair. Color changed these rules. It wasn't exciting at first, it was uncomfortable, harder to manage. You could ruin something quickly without realizing it until it was far too late. And at the time, I didn't understand that kind of instability. I didn't trust my skills yet, and I certainly didn't like the outcomes I was getting. So the transition was slow. Trial and error, a lot of work that didn't go anywhere. Paintings that stalled, pieces that got painted over, or, on rare occasion, abandoned entirely. But I stayed with it, not because the results were good, but because the process started to feel interesting. Now, through experience, I understand much better what I'm doing, how to steer the painting where it needs to go, and how to use all the colors along the way, even the ones I don't like. This is Phthalo Blue. I've had this paint for about 20 years. Back then, I was a competitive powerlifter and strongman, and generally superhuman. Now I'm mostly just tired. Still kind of strong, just in a dad sort of way. This paint, though, it's been consistent. I've mixed it into everything. It's quietly responsible for over 100 pieces of work, and this last little pour finally used it up. One color, 20 years, full of memories, but also somewhat empty from the life I've lived. Honestly, that feels about right. Here, I'm creating a custom blend: titanium buff white, quinacridone nickel azo gold, and an unlabeled yellow that's been around long enough to earn its mystery. I could probably figure out what it is, but I don't really need to. I know how it behaves, and that's what matters. I've always believed that materials make a big difference in the experience, not necessarily the product. I use the best quality paints and tools I can find, or make, because good materials don't get in the way. They stand behind you, maybe hand you a nice tea after a long day. They do what you ask, and sometimes a little more, but generally are devoid of problems and help provide only solutions. Once that base is down, things move quickly. Sea greens, soft blues, shifts that feel almost automatic at this point. Not rushed, just familiar. When the materials are consistent, your hands relax, decisions stop feeling dramatic, and start feeling intuitive. And after a little more work, there's this pause right here on the orange. I always like moments like this. The pigment settles, the surface catches the light, and suddenly you see the window reflected back at you, literally. The outside world slipping into the painting for a moment of magic. I think sometimes we underestimate how much quality influences enjoyment, not because expensive is better, but because reliability creates trust and positive experience. When the color mixes exactly how it should, and the process feels fluid instead of forced. I have lived in Brooklyn long enough to watch the same neighborhood reinvent itself several times. Lately, it's been creative. Things feel rougher in places, louder, a lot more chaotic. And somehow, right in the middle of all that, the city built what might honestly be the best playground I've ever seen. It should be anyway, as it cost $20 million. You look at it and you think, okay, clearly someone cared a lot, at least for their paycheck. And then you walk a block in any direction and go, oh, right. That kind of contrast is impressive in its own way. When I'm working like this, I'm not narrating every move. The painting process stays calm and loose. Colors come and go. They interact, misbehave a little, then settle down. It's less about individual layers and more about what builds up over time. Cities work like that too, just with more senseless meetings. You get bright ideas layered over long standing issues, well intentioned improvements sitting next to things that clearly didn't get the memo. None of it lands cleanly, it just accumulates. A lot of people watch this kind of abstract artwork as something relaxing, calm, ambient visuals they can have on while they decompress or just let their thoughts wander. That's how I approach it, too. There's no rush here, no demand for answers. My painting isn't trying to solve the neighborhood, it's just helping me deal with the change, especially when most of our days are loud, reactive, and full of things that disturb your inner peace. This is slow art by design, quiet, steady, unbothered by urgency. I come back to familiar rhythms and color relationships not because they're safe, but because they're reliable. They let everything else calm down around them. By the end of the day, that's usually what most of us are looking for. Something you can do to relax. I started out pretty clueless, like we all do, but find hard to admit. I didn't have a roadmap or much encouragement, just a sense that this mattered to me, and an innate willingness to keep going despite nothing going my way. I think about that sometimes, especially when I think about that blue paint I've been using for 20 years. All the things that happened in that time. Everything I learned by trial and error. Every skill that came from wanting to understand something deeply, not because anyone was watching. Most of it was self-directed, unfunded, uncelebrated. Just work, in the dark. No parade or name in bright lights. And New York, well, New York was mostly unkind to me, despite a few moments of bliss. It'll do that to you, be the bad girlfriend, as it were, and make you want to be here despite the pain. The city will push you, distract you, elevate you briefly, then knock you sideways just to see what you do next. It's generous and brutal in equal measure, and if you're not careful, you can lose yourself chasing approval from people who are selfish, petty, or impressed mostly by themselves. I did that for a while, got lost. I confused motion for progress. What brought me back, slowly, was the work. Not the audience, not the outcome, just being in the studio, paying attention, letting the process steady me again, focusing back on my dreams. That's what this section feels like to me. Not movement for the sake of it, but accumulation. Decisions layered quietly over time. Color arriving, interacting, settling. Close ups where the surface carries the meaning without explanation. I use brushes a bit more here than earlier. Not constantly, just with intent. A rounded flat and a larger fan brush. Different tools, different conversations. The point isn't so much control. It's guidance built through the utmost finesse and deft touches. In today's edition of Calm and Colors, we're going to layer in some different grays here over top of a metallic surface. So the metallic surface will bleed through in certain lights. It started actually with this gray base. The metallic surface will kind of resonate with the gray, even though it's been pushed over this, what is this color? Transparent yellow iron oxide. So we go back to our N5 neutral gray. We give it a quick shake because I found actually these settle in a weird manner. Now it's already doing that. That's fine. 3 little streaks. It's highly potent. And we're going to go to our small blender. And I just want to push the water exactly where I wanted to cover. This overly dark spot needs to go. And we'll blend a little upwards here. And that's it. I'll let it sort of sit naturally, and then I will caress the entropy as it moves about the plane. I might have to just lay down a thin layer here with a paintbrush or other implement. Because this area doesn't want to play nice for whatever reason. It coagulated there last night, but today maybe it needs a little bit more abrasion. So we have this wacky child's painting device, and we just give it a good scratch. There we go. Quick clean up in aisle 2 with our recycled collection of paper towels. Put the pigment where you need it, not where it wants to go. Okay. So we'll keep things right about there. I think a lot about authenticity while working like this, mostly because the word itself feels worn out. Real authenticity is not photogenic, it's slow, private, and doesn't show up on social media much these days. When the outside world starts to feel overwhelming, I sometimes joke that you can either make your own version of happy little trees, or you become drunk on denial. People still return to Bob Ross not because he was naive, but because he was present. He didn't perform authenticity, he simply was authentic. He became the man he wanted to be. He created the world he loved, and that existed from within despite his own pain and the cruelty of the outside world. What I'm doing here isn't a reference or a tribute, it's my version. Same underlying values, different language. A fine art studio approach to calm, in my own fashion, just with slightly worse hair. So this is why you don't put your paintings in the window on a windy day. Unfortunately, it looks like it has gone all the way through with the damage here. Here's a close-up. You can see at least 3 to 4 layers there. And we've knocked over a couple bottles. I think this bottle was the one that went through it. But as you can see, it's a windy day. That little air freshener is just spinning around on itself. And it looks like we have to do a little bit of repair. So the damage on the backside, as you can see, is definitely going through. So we're going to have to re-stretch this the best we can and put a bit of a patch over it on both sides and then rebuild. I didn't know where to start, so naturally I tried something out of frustration first. I grabbed a torch and mounted a vague hope that maybe I could melt things back into place, like the heat would somehow negotiate with physics. It did not. Of course it didn't. Hindsight is such a brilliantly clear way to make the past you feel rather dumb. I was angry at myself for letting this happen, letting this work fall victim to something I would consider carelessness, and I kept thinking that this piece was now going to never be finished and bear the scar of my mistake forever. I composed myself, took a step back, and decided to get back to the basics. Starting over was probably the best bet, since, so far, I was having a lot of trouble getting the painting to move in any coherent direction anyway. I took a breath and started again slowly, which, in retrospect, is what I should have done earlier. I got a small container of gesso. I bought a small unprepped roll of canvas after considerable searching on several sites, and I started working from the back, methodically, quietly, patching the structure instead of worrying about appearances, making things more scientific and less hopeful wanting. It turned out, other than the gesso and the canvas, I had all the tools I needed. There was no need to rush or slam everything together, so I could get back to work as fast as possible. I just had to learn a couple of things and take my time. Simple. That part took a lot of patience in the wake of my self loathing for letting all this happen. Waiting things to set while mumbling profanity at the setback. Letting material do what it's supposed to do instead of rushing it into cooperation. And finding out how to do all this along the way. This was all new territory, as I never had had something like this happen before. Once the back dried, I returned to the front. Using a transparent medium in small passes, I plugged the hole without pretending it never happened, reinforcing but not disguising it, then giving the whole area shape with new paint applied liberally. Watching this happen reminds me a lot of how my body's worked over the years. I've done objectively ridiculous things with it. Squatted close to 1,000 pounds, pulled buses, pushed strength way past what made sense on paper. And for the most part, that stuff went fine, other than breaking almost a dozen barbells and at least a few egos. What actually gets me hurt these days are the non events: walking downstairs, standing up too quickly, turning my head like I've been doing it my entire life, which apparently is now a risky move. That's how it always goes. The dramatic stressors prepare you, the quiet ones catch you off guard. The hole itself wasn't the real issue. It was what it forced me to confront: how fragile things can be, even when they're strong, and how repair is often more about patience than forced action. Regardless, like life, the work keeps going. So do you. Just hopefully with a little bit more awareness the next time you walk down the stairs. Just giving a more full view of what everything looks like in terms of texture. Texture's pretty heavy on this side. This painting has a scar. Just one, hopefully no more than that in the future. You can still see it right now. It's not subtle yet, and I'm not trying to hide it. Over time, it'll soften. It may even disappear entirely. But at the moment, it's part of the surface. I'm using its texture to help rebuild and continue the work forward. The scar tells me exactly where the painting broke, where something went wrong, and it's also a lesson. It's useful information, not something I should try to ignore. It's an added feature to the surface, not something that I should try to bury as soon as possible with dozens of layers. That single fateful moment forced a pivot. It changed how I approached everything that came after it: what I reinforced, what I simplified, and what I let go of. This painting was just sort of ambling around before that, sitting in some kind of painting purgatory. Because of what happened, this work will end up in a better place, not despite the damage, but because of it. I've learned not to rush past moments like this. One break can carry more clarity than dozens of smooth decisions. One loss carries many more lessons than a dozen wins. When this finally settles into a finished state, the scar may not be the most visible thing, but it will be embedded in every choice that helped bring the piece home. One mistake, one shift, and hopefully a much better ending. What I've learned over time is that momentum doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's just consistency, showing up when nobody's clapping, making things because you still care, not because people are watching. That shift, building something because it brings you back to yourself, changes the tone of everything. The work feels lighter, decisions stop feeling precious. You allow room for curiosity again. That's the part I enjoy most now. Not proving anything, just staying engaged, letting the studio be a place where experimentation is allowed and mistakes are built upon. At this point, this painting has been restarted, I don't know, half a dozen times? Because if there's one thing this painting and my life have in common, it's that neither of them have followed a straight line. They're colorful, sure, but they're also heavy. A lot of layers, a lot of revisions, a lot of moments where you step back and think, okay, that didn't work, but something has to. I've come to see those contradictions as a feature, not a problem. You can have color and weight, calm and intensity, progress that looks messy on the way to being useful, or looks like not much at all, but in the end, you find it was still great progress. I've lived that more than once. I grew up on the Upper East Side. That was home. Then I moved away, having to follow my family as you do. And eventually, I found myself coming back, older, wiser, slightly more tired. And pretty much on my own. My girlfriend at the time was not especially helpful. Let's just leave it at that. We were horrible to each other. It was another growing experience. But unfortunately, I had no one else for a time. So I had to reestablish everything: work, identity, direction, figure out who I was again, without the familiar scaffolding. That kind of reset that forces clarity whether you want it or not. This painting carries some of that energy. Starting over does not mean starting from nothing. You keep what works, you layer over what doesn't. You adjust, scrape back, rebuild, layer by layer by layer. Well, as we can see, this didn't really pan out as planned. It was supposed to dry a little thinner, and it's created all sorts of ripples, and the color is not exactly what I wanted. So it looks like it'll be another 3 to 4 layers to fix this mistake, and then we'll keep pushing it back in the direction I suppose I should have been. I do my own thing with painting. I go by feel. I don't really study past masters. I'm not tracking movements or styles. And I'm not interested in measuring myself against whatever history is supposed to say I should be doing or whatever is cool on social media. For me, painting starts with finding a peaceful moment and extending it for as long as possible. One decision leads to the next. I stay present, respond to what's happening on the canvas, and take the next step as honestly as I can. That's it. Which brings me back to this idea that floats around online all the time. Real painters use brushes. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they use body parts instead. Sometimes they switch approaches entirely halfway through, and the art becomes more performative than art. I have my own grievances against that, but moving on. The problem isn't the tools, it's the way people use self important rules to validate themselves by invalidating others. A lot of what looks like confidence online is actually insecurity dressed up. People drawing hard lines because they're afraid of ambiguity, afraid of not knowing, afraid of doing something that doesn't immediately prove its worth. Real progress comes from curiosity, not dominance, from asking, what happens if I try this? Instead of, why does your work look like mine? Why doesn't your whatever meet my expectation? Everyone has to find their own way in. There is not a single path. There isn't a checklist that makes the work legitimate. There's just attention, repetition, and willingness, and failure, which, honestly, deserves better PR. Don't be afraid to fail. Invite the failure in and fucking take notes. That's where the real information is. Not in getting it right the first time, but in seeing why it didn't work and deciding what to do next. Failure is not the opposite of skill or even success. It's how those things get built. When you stop competing with everyone else and start paying attention to your own curiosity, things change. The work gets quieter, more grounded, less performative. You stop worrying about what counts as real and start caring about what feels honest. I just stay as honest as possible to myself and enjoy the work the best I can. Use brushes, don't use brushes, study history, ignore it completely. Work fast, work slow. None of that determines whether the work matters. What matters is showing up with attention, staying curious, and letting the process teach you what it needs to, without tearing anyone else down in the process. This is supposed to be enjoyment. Stop making everything a competition, or else you're going to miss that part. If you're still watching this, just a quick reminder about the giveaway. The whole idea is tied to layers. Watch all the way through, count them carefully, and don't forget the magic word that appears on screen near the end. The details matter here, for the painting and for the contest. At this point, the work is probably about 75% there, which is an interesting phase. Most of the big decisions have already been made. What's left now is patience and a lot of small touches. Refinement, if you will. Continuing to add, but in smaller, more focused ways. It's been a long journey to get here. Not dramatic in a single moment kind of way, but long in the accumulation sense. Days layered on days, decisions layered on top of corrections. Enough time spent with it that the painting and I have developed a kind of shared history. I'm actually happy to have made it this far. Not relieved, not eager, as that's not really my person. Just quietly glad that it's still standing, still working, still giving something back, although almost finished just the same. There is an old kind of folk story, no idea if it's from anywhere official or just something people have always told, that goes like this. A traveler sets out on a long road, breaks his cart halfway there, fixes it poorly, keeps going anyway, breaks it again, fixes it better the second time, and by the time he reaches the end, the cart barely resembles the one he started with. Someone asks why he didn't just turn back and start over, and he says, because the road taught me what the cart needed to become. So I made it so to get to where I needed to go. That's how this feels. The painting isn't what I imagined at the beginning, although, truth be told, I didn't have much of an idea then. It's heavier now, more complicated, more informed. But that's not a disappointment. That's just what happens when you stay with something long enough for it to change you a little. And that applies outside the studio too. You don't walk long roads without shedding things that don't travel well: ideas, habits, sometimes people, sometimes whole versions of yourself passing like the shadows change through seasons. By the time you're this far along, it's less about proving you were right at the start and more about appreciating that you kept moving at all. So, if this painting gets finished following this direction, that'll be great. If it doesn't, I'll just restart it again, and it'll get there eventually. I've restarted far worse things. I've rebuilt far messier situations. And I've ended up in better places than I expected after letting go of what wasn't meant to make the whole trip. Ask my ex girlfriends. So, I've been working over this piece, probably about 15 to 20 of the same layers back to back in the same spot with the same idea. The execution just not right. Not yet, anyways. And I'm waiting for spring to erupt. It seems like it wants to, and then it doesn't, and then it wants to, and then it doesn't. Some 75-degree days, some 60-degree days with gale force winds where you can literally lean into the wind. It's always fun. But as I don't know if you've heard that, the wind puts in a word or two. I find myself wanting more space. It's a common theme here in New York, I suppose. My little corner here of my studio where I do all of my artwork. Maybe 110 square feet, give or take, walled off from the rest of the apartment, just with everything situated right there, just off camera, and my illustration table behind the camera, which I've been working well to get uncovered, I think. Unfortunately, with the limitations of space, things kind of turn into docking points, project areas. In a perfect world, I would have a barn studio, excuse me, whereby I could just expand and have all these different projects around me, and I could sit in the center with my old red couch and old red chair and just take in these projects and sort of take in the collective calm and the peace and build back my soul a bit from the crazy I've encountered and the hurt and the pain and just the general weathering that my life has done to me. So, to be certain, I'm much more resilient from what I've gone through and where I am and all of that. And I suppose there is a debt of gratitude, but not without its scars. So, on a quiet midday Thursday, as it is such, I will work a little bit with the sunlight and the color and take a soul breath or three while I hopefully get pretty close to finishing this one. It's coming along. Always just being there. Oh, wait, mists. Okay. Now, take a quick sword to this, and we're going to Bob Ross this into existence. So, step one, find a tiny little fan brush. Step two, paint the sides. That's it. There was a stretch where I lived in Queens for about 8 months, and I turned my entire apartment into a studio. The living room was my painting studio, the dining room became my illustration space. Everything had a place. There was room to move, to think, to work, without constantly negotiating with clutter. I spent a lot of time dialing that in, finding shelves, storage, surfaces that actually worked for me. Nothing fancy, just basic systems that stayed out of the way and let the work happen. That approach stuck. It eventually expanded into floor to ceiling shelving that now holds a frankly unreasonable amount of art supplies. Tens of thousands of dollars worth if I stop and do the math. Back then, though, it felt clean, focused, almost luxurious in how simple it was. The trade off, unfortunately, was isolation. I was working second shift at the time. I'd get home around 2 in the morning, wired yet tired. The city would finally quiet down and I'd work for hours while everything and everyone else slept. When I finally stopped, I put something on while falling asleep. Almost always Bob Ross. I didn't do this to study technique, not to copy anything. It was the tone, the calm, the sense that no matter what happened on the canvas, nothing bad was going to come of it. There was something genuinely magical about that. Bob Ross was authentic in a way that's become rare. Not ironic, not performative, just present, calm all the way through, even at the end. Marketing helped introduce that calm to the world. It let millions of people experience something steady and humane through art. But it also, let's say, complicated his life. I think about that a lot. I'm not trying to be him. I don't want my life to go that way. But I don't deny the similarity either. Not stylistically, but philosophically. The belief that calm matters, that presence matters, that the process itself can be enough. Those months in Queens taught me how much structure helps, and also how much I hate the road organizational system. Street, road, driveway, all next to each other, numbers out of order. Who does that? Anyways, that apartment is probably long gone, but the approach has stayed. Make space, pay attention, let the work unfold without forcing it into something louder than it needs to be. And, as always, remember to make happy little colors. Something I keep noticing, both in painting and in life, is how rarely things move the way you expect them to. You start with a general direction, maybe even a plan, and then that plan immediately runs into reality. Schedules slip, materials misbehave, ideas change. Gravity gets involved, weather too sometimes. This painting had all of that. It's been restarted, redirected, politely argued with, restarted again and again. At certain points, it really did feel like the work was at the mercy of the heavens, or more accurately, the floor. That tends to be how things actually work. I used to think progress was about momentum, constant forward motion, fewer questions, cleaner paths. Like if you just keep moving, eventually everything would line up and stay that way. These days, it feels less like momentum and more like responsiveness. Paying attention long enough to notice when something needs to be rethought instead of forcing it to cooperate. This piece is full of that. A lot of color, a lot of density, a lot of decisions sitting on top of corrections, calm but not light, open but not casual. The kind of calm that comes from staying with something instead of trying to oversimplify it. Which probably explains why I made it this way. I've lived in that space before, more than once, leaving places, coming back to others, building something carefully, then watching it break in an unexpected spot, finding a quieter route forward that you didn't know existed until the loud one failed. Real life does that constantly. You don't get clean arcs or perfect pacing. You get long middles, revisions, moments where nothing moves at all, followed by sudden change you didn't schedule. You don't erase those experiences. You just build on top of them and hope they add depth instead of noise. That's one of the things painting teaches you if you stick with it long enough. Not everything needs to be resolved immediately. Some things just need to be held in place for a while, observed, accommodated, allowed to soften until they start to make sense on their own timeline. And yes, before anyone asks, by most reasonable definitions, I think this painting came out good. It's colorful, it has presence, it survived several restarts and somehow held together. That's a win, a solid one. I'm calling it a success and filing the paperwork accordingly. But what I'm most happy about isn't the result, it's what the process felt like while it was happening. The hours in the studio where time flattened out, where nothing outside the room felt particularly urgent, where the noise dropped enough that that next step became obvious, not because I pushed for it, but because I stayed long enough for it to show itself. That's the part I keep coming back for. Okay. Now this and that. This and It's also why I don't get too wrapped up in arguments about what painting is supposed to look like or how artists are supposed to behave. I've tried carrying other people's definitions around. They tend to get heavy quickly and they don't fit particularly well. What does work for me is curiosity, staying open, letting the work teach instead of trying to prove something to it or to those looking on from social media. That approach carried me through a lot of chapters. Different cities, different studios, different versions of myself, each one briefly convinced that they had things figured out before reality offered a counterpoint. Somehow, all of that ended up in this piece. Not literally, but structurally. Maybe it's the soul of the work, if that's a useful word here, in the way it holds contradiction without collapsing, in how it doesn't rush to explain itself or apologize for being complicated, for having scars. There's color here, but also weight, ease alongside effort, control in some areas, and a willingness to let things be imperfect in others. That balance took time. And it took accepting that restarting doesn't put you back at zero. It just means you're working from a slightly more informed place than you were before, whether you planned on learning that lesson or not. If nothing else, this painting reinforces something I've come to trust more and more, that making space for calm, actual calm, not the staged or performative kind, has real value. Not because it fixes everything, not because it makes life simpler, but because it gives you somewhere to stand while you figure out what comes next, which is really what this whole process has been about. The rest, well, the rest is what you're about to see. Before we wrap this up, I just wanted to say thank you for watching. I know how easy it is to not click, to not stay, to not finish something all the way through as long as this, so the fact that you did actually means a lot. I hope you enjoyed the process, the quiet moments, the weird turns, all of it. And if you're still here, stay tuned for the next one, which I fully intend not to break, and definitely not restart a half dozen times. No promises, but that's the plan. Thanks for watching. Calm and Colors.